Welcome everyone, this is Shadi Abu Yusuf and we're still talking about classroom management, but this time we're going to be talking about monitoring, and we will be talking also about why monitoring is really important, and we will also cover how to monitor. And then at the very end of the episode, like every time, we'll be talking about how monitoring would affect your assessment on professional courses like CELTA, CERTIS, or you name it. So, the first reason why we think monitoring is really important is listening for errors in the target language. Again, maybe your main aim in this lesson is grammar, and you taught grammar, you presented your grammar on the board, and then you moved to control practice. And then after that, you give the students a freer practice on grammar. So again, you need to monitor in order to listen to your students having a conversation where your target language is integrated. And you need also to see whether students are able to produce the target language correctly or not. And you need to take notes on what they do. So that's one reason why monitoring is really important, is to see whether your students are producing accurate language or not. Again, another reason why monitoring is really important is what we call listening to ensure that your learners are on the task. So imagine this situation here. You gave instructions to students and you asked ICQs and you did your best to make sure that the students got your instructions. However, you still need to monitor to make sure that your students are on the task. And again, experienced teachers would tell you that sometimes they give very clear instructions, or let's say that this is how they see it. And then again, when they start monitoring that, they discover that the students may be on a whole different page. So again, you need to monitor to make sure that your students are on the task. And that's the second reason why monitoring is really important. A third reason would be taking opportunities for micro-teaching. And what do we mean by micro-teaching here? Like you monitor, and then you notice that there is this student who needs more help. Maybe because everybody got the task, everybody understood what they needed to do, except for this student. Then you would go to this student and you would start micro-teaching this student, talking to this student quietly, explaining things and making things clearer. That's also another reason why we need to monitor. Again, another reason why we need to monitor is actually assessing both individuals and the whole class. And it is part of what we do as teachers all the time in our classrooms. We monitor students to see how much they got. We monitor them to see, to have a look at their progress. So again, monitoring is fantastic. It makes you aware of your students' performance. So that's also another reason why we need to monitor. And I would say also one more reason is adding input. What do we mean by adding input here? Especially in fluency activities, and if we're talking about freer practice. And then again, students are speaking together. They are working in groups or they're working in pairs. And then you see that one of your students is struggling with some vocabulary. And then again, you will interfere and talk with the students. Of course, you wouldn't interrupt them in a fluency activity, but you would talk with them and provide them maybe with some help, giving them some input that they would use during the conversation. So it's very good also for supporting students in fluency activities. Right. Again, and this is also another reason why monitoring is great. Assessing a task. What do we mean by assessing a task? I'm not talking here about assessing students. I'm talking here about assessing your own material designing. Like we're teachers and sometimes we need to be creative. Sometimes we create our own activities and we create our own material. And the activities that we design need to be actually tried in real classrooms. We need to experiment with them. And one way of understanding and realizing whether these activities work in the classroom or not is by monitoring. You monitor and you see how students actually deal with the tasks you designed. And this would inform also your task designing in the future. So you might say, I guess I need to change the way I'm designing tasks. I guess I need to do this next time. So again, monitoring would give you information to do this. Now, one more point to add here, which is maintaining discipline. And it's very important. It's because, again, when you monitor, you would be able to see whether students are working on the tasks you gave them or not. Because sometimes the students might be, distracted by side talks or talking about something else, and they're not actually doing the task. Maybe you might see this is a student who is actually busy with some social media websites. Maybe this is a student who's on Facebook. And again, without embarrassing those students on talking to them directly, once you start monitoring, you will see that those students are, okay, we'll get to the task, because again, they don't want to see that the teacher, or they don't want the teacher to see them busy with something rather than the tasks given to them. Right. Another point is improving timing. And again, a lot of teachers come to me sometimes, and especially during lesson planning, and then they say, Shadi, we don't know how to time our stages. Yes, we understand the stages, but it's difficult to decide whether to give 5 minutes to this activity or 10 minutes to this activity. And fair enough, because again, timing is not easy, especially for novice teachers. You need to be an experienced teacher to become able to actually time your tasks. But if you're newly introduced to the profession, it's a bit difficult to understand how much time needs to be given to this task. But again, monitoring is amazing for this, because sometimes you say, okay, 7 minutes for this task. But then when you go to the actual lesson, you discover that students finish this task in 3 minutes. And this would inform your decisions in the future regarding timing. So when you're back home now, designing your own lesson plan, say, oh yeah, well, wait a minute. This activity took from my students 3 minutes in the real classroom. So when I'm designing an activity that looks like it, I'll be careful. So I wouldn't give it 3 minutes this time. Maybe I'll give it 5 minutes, 3 for the task, 2 minutes for feedback or whatever. So again, monitoring is really great for timing in the future. And also one of the reasons that I believe myself that monitoring is so important for is actually what we call adjusting pace. Now again, pace is about how fast you are in your lesson or how slow you are. And we don't want teachers to be fast with their lessons, and we don't want them to be slow with their lessons, because if you're fast with your lesson, if your pace is so fast, this means that some students wouldn't be able to understand what you're trying to talk about. That's a big problem. And if you're so slow with your pace, this means that a lot of students will get bored. So I would say always be moderate about pace. How would you know this? Monitoring. Because when you monitor, you see how many students finished your task. And this tells you how much time you need to give to the rest of students and whether you need to move to another stage of your lesson or not. Now again, sometimes when you monitor, sometimes it's in your head, you want to move to the coming stage of the lesson, but when you monitor, you notice that most of the students haven't finished. And then you decide, okay, wait a minute, slow down a bit here and give more time for students to finish. So monitoring is extremely important when it comes to adjusting time. Right. Again, now, so that was about why we believe that monitoring is really important in the classroom. But again, here comes the question. How do we monitor? And there are very few things that we need to do in order to monitor more efficiently. Number one, obviously, move chairs away from walls. It's always great to monitor from the back, you know what I mean? Like move the chairs a bit away from the wall so that you can actually monitor from the back of the students. But when you when you're monitoring also from the back of the students, don't get too close so that you scare them. Like don't try to put your head between students like this, because that would be like, okay, that would be like a scary movie. So don't do this. Just monitor from behind, but in a nice way. So keep a good distance between you and your students. Don't scare them. But again, move chairs so that you free a way for yourself to monitor. Also, make sure that there is a clear route around the classroom. So if we've got a busy class and we've got a large number of students in one class, and students are sitting like in rows, okay, one after the other, then make sure that there is a way in the middle where you can go in the middle and monitor students on your right and on your left. And you need to do this before actually students get in the classroom. So it's kind of classroom arrangement that you do before everybody gets in the classroom. And it's really important that you do this. Also, when you monitor, don't spend too much time only with one group or a pair of students, or maybe one student. So monitoring has to be, or you've got to be actually fair when monitoring your students in a classroom. Don't spend too much time with one student or a pair of students or a group of students, so other students feel neglected. Okay, so try to be fair about this. One thing also to say about monitoring is actually, if you are monitoring to write down a student's errors in a freer practice, because again, we're not supposed to be interrupting our students in a freer practice or in a conversation to correct them, because again, this harms their fluency so much. So the best solution is to take notes down on a performance. However, when you do this, do it discreetly. Like, don't just, stand while monitoring your students, and then once you pick a mistake, you go like, and then you start writing. Because again, this will make your students more anxious. And if students are anxious, the production is actually down. They don't produce a lot of the target language. They don't produce good English. Always make sure that students are comfortable in your class. So when you're monitoring, don't make your students worried. If you're about to write a mistake, be smart about it. Once you pick that mistake and you want to write it down, give your back to these two students, move a bit away in the classroom, write it discreetly on a piece of paper without a student seeing you, right? And again, when you're monitoring, please don't look too serious. Why would you monitor when your facial gestures are like this? What is that? A smile would do. Okay, you need to look cheerful. I would say not only with monitoring, but most importantly when monitoring. Teachers need to be cheerful all the time in their classes, but especially when you're monitoring, because if you look too serious when you're monitoring, students feel that they're making mistakes, or they don't feel comfortable because they feel that they are under surveillance, not being monitored by the teacher, and you don't want your students to be in that situation, right? And again, another piece of advice about monitoring: you don't have to stand all the time when you monitor. Some teachers think that they need to be standing all the time when they're monitoring. Well, no, you don't. If you're teaching 5 students or even 10 students and they're sitting in half a circle and you're sitting a bit close to them, why do you need to stand up if you can see everything? Right? If you can see what's on paper, you don't have to stand and monitor, right? So again, you can actually monitor when you're sitting. Well, you might have to stand and monitor if it's like if you have bigger number of students. So again, don't feel that you must stand every time you're monitoring. Now let's move to how monitoring would affect your performance on professional courses like CELTA, CERT, TESOL. And again, as we do every time, I'll be giving you an example of CELTA here by Cambridge Assessment English. Wonderful course, of course. And monitoring is a criterion in the CELTA syllabus. So let's read together what Cambridge Assessment English tells us about monitoring. They say that one of the criteria that teachers need to address is monitoring learners appropriately in relation to the task or activity. And you need to focus so much on the adverb appropriately. It's not only about monitoring, it's about monitoring in a good way, as we said. And then you have a kind of a description of what is meant by monitoring here. And number one, so they say, teachers need to listen to learners attentively, but unobtrusively during the stages of the lesson. Like, yes, you're attentive, but again, you're discreet. Students sometimes don't see that you're monitoring. So don't act like, a boss in the classroom when monitoring. You don't monitor like this, showing the students that you're monitoring. Be discreet about it. You don't want your students to be worried. You don't want them to be anxious. The second point is know when to intervene in learner-centered activities. That's very important. Yes, you're monitoring, but you're not monitoring because you will interfere every now and then and interrupt students. We don't say that, okay? So again, as we said, monitor discreetly. If students are busy in a freer practice, don't interrupt them and affect their fluency. On a piece of paper, take notes on the errors, okay? And later, you will discuss these errors with them after the whole conversation is over. Right, another point is ensure that your attention is spread evenly amongst the learners. So again, as we said, don't spend too much time with a pair of students, one student, or a group of students, right? And the last point is know when to move on to the next stage of the lesson, which is, as we said, about pace. Okay, so again, we came to the end of today's episode and we were talking about monitoring. So thank you so much. And again, as you know, you can always contact me through my blog, www.shadi.blog, and you can also leave me emails at the following address, me@shadi.blog. So if you like this video, please don't forget to press like, subscribe also to the channel, leave a comment and activate notifications. Thank you so much. See you again. Bye bye.